Hey everybody, this is Dr. Bill Janeshak on the Conquering Stress podcast, and today I have a little bit different platform that I'm going to be doing. Um, July was National Autism and ADHD Awareness Month, and I had done a talk in my office about a story about my daughter and how we kind of were battling the spectrum disorder and ADHD stuff, and what I consider a success story. And I've shared this with lots of patients and different people and on different as guests on different podcasts before. So every month I do a different class in my office, and so I thought it'd be appropriate. I'll just kind of put something together about the journey a little bit deeper and made me think a little bit about what we had done. And that's what we're going to do today. Because it was live in the office in Yorba Linda, California, the land of gracious living. But I've had a lot of people on social. They're just saying, "Hey, is this recorded? Can I see it? Can you get it in?" And I didn't have anything, but I promised them that someday I would get it out to them so that they could check it out and see if it resonates with them or not. And today's that day. And I'm going to just run in through the two talks that I did. The first time we did a talk over there, everybody in the office, and there was probably 15, 20 people or something in there. But a vast majority of them were saying, "Are you going to do this talk again? Because I want other people to do it." So they really wanted to know the system that I'd worked on, because this is an overview and I didn't go down the rabbit hole. But I have the PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you guys today. That's going to show both both versions of what I did, but the concepts are the same. So I'm going to share my screen here and see what we can do. And I want to show you exactly what we had opening up. This is what we did. It was New Hope for ADHD and Autism. It's a free parent workshop. This wasn't for kids. And let me move me down over here. Nobody wants to see that. Um, and this is what it talks. And this is where we started with. That's my NATO, little Courtney Rose. And we adopted her when she was about 18 months old. And, there was through the adoption process, there's some issues and stuff. She was born with a genetic disorder that caused her to have a small jaw at birth, and also some digestive issues. And you can see the glasses on them, and it's a connective tissue disorder. But we got up, and she's in the system, and us being hippies that we are, it wasn't that big a deal. She had some mucus going on, so what looked like allergies. I got her adjusted. We started feeding her, some actual real food, playing with her, bringing her into the family, loving on her, and all this other stuff. So after probably about a year or so, maybe a little bit more, she just didn't seem to jive. There's just milestones that the parents are used to that she wasn't hitting. She seemed a little socially off. When we first got her, as we would hold her around, there was an attachment disorder. She would go to anybody. As soon as somebody up, she just reached for the next person, the next person. She ate, and she still eats. Oh my God, that girl eats. She's just this little skinny thing, and she just puts stuff away like nobody's business. And then as she would have some breakdowns, and she would, the night terrors and not getting things. When we first got her, she didn't have her glasses. So she was always reaching up, and she was just always touching stuff and feeling stuff and moving around. We're going like, what the heck? You can imagine from her history and everything that she had probably before she was two, a medical file that was probably about 3 inches thick. And my wife took her to one of her, because she had some genetic disorders and she was adopted. She was under the care of Loma Linda. It was kind of a state-run thing, but we kept her doctors and everything, and they would So because of the genetic condition, every year she has to kind of go do a once over, and it's a teaching hospital, so they're looking at the case and discussing her. She gets better care than the president, I think. But the doctor, as we're meeting the new doctors, they're saying, "Where's her glasses?" We're going, "We don't know anything about her glasses." And somehow her prescription got lost. And so we got another one, and a couple weeks later, after getting her eyes all checked, my wife called me and she's crying. She goes, "This little girl," and she has a video of her the first time that she put glasses on, just standing in the middle of the optometrist place, kind of for the first time seeing the world as it is, and kind of mesmerized. But that's why she was grabbing everything. It's more tactile stuff. But that's not the point. I'm going to get to parts of that a little bit later because it's important as you walk along this journey. So we see her acting out, and it's the defiant syndrome, and she had some ADHD, and we're going, well, what's up with our little girl? And we go to psychologists and we get diagnosis, and she's definitely ADHD and she's on the spectrum. We're going to have to do this, and here's the services. We're going to have to go through regional center, and we go through wrong way. All this other stuff. We're going to special pediatricians, occupational therapists, ABA, the county services. When we get into her school, she was in what they call a rocket program, which is a preschool, and we get IEPs, which are special accommodations for the special, and there's special tutors, and it's just like all overwhelming, but obviously that's what we want to do. And I want you to remind everybody that you're listening or you're watching this is that I took this from this is my role as a dad. I'm not a doctor. If you've been listening to this, I'm a chiropractor. I really focus on functional neurology and functional medicine, which just kind of means we run down rabbit holes pretty deep to get to the root cause of everything. But in this case, it's I look back, I'm like, duh. But I I'm sitting here just as a dad, and believe it or not, as I sit there, I'm just fairly quiet. I'm just learning, and I'm taking in information. I'm like, okay, well, if she has this, we have to do X, Y, and Z, and do different things. And while I've treated all these types of patients before, I've never been their main doctor or really got down in the weeds. It's usually with kids, it's ear infections or constipations or not eating or limping funky or those kind of things. But I would just kind of treat that one thing. I wasn't doing a full blown exam. I was kind of a piece of the pie. And like most kids with a diagnosis, that's what happens. We have, like look at the screen if you're watching this on video. If you're not, I'm going through the PowerPoint and I'm just showing all these things, the tutors and resource centers and doctors and occupational therapy and ABA and psychologists and CPS and regional centers and county services and special services and IEPs and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And we're just taking in information. There's more stuff that's going on and moving on. And why do I keep going the wrong way? There you go. Come on. Um, and I would ask questions, and they just said, "Well, that's just the way it is with these kids. It's they do this. You can expect a little, but don't get your hopes up on them being any Rhodes scholars soon, or we're just they were politely telling us, well, let's just get her involved in the area, and there's special programs, and they have their little gifts that we can find out, but we've got to get them acclimated to." Basically, what they were saying was just so that they could function somewhat around normal kids or normal population or people. And I'm just listening, and I'm like, what is this? And again, I'm a root cause guy. So when where am I? I'm I'm never going to get this. Right now, I'm trying to find my, there we go. There we go. Uh, as we start going through, I remember we were sitting in an IEP meeting, and this was probably about the third one. So we're sitting, if you haven't been to an IEP meeting, and that's at the school, and it looks like a courtroom. And there's someone taking notes, and there's the principal there, and there's the teacher, and then there's the aide if there's an aide, and there's a resource center person, and there's the psychologist or counselor, occupational therapist. There's just everybody in this room, and they bring this something that looks out like a summons, and that's her file. And each one of them goes through and say, "Oh, we've evaluated her on this date and did this, and she could touch her nose 3 times without being told twice, and she raised her right hand 3 out of 4 times, so she's a 72.3% standard, which the standard is 81 point. So she's poor, she's out of bounds here." And it's just like a statistical. It's almost like they're they're doing something like, well, we're really working with her and this is the time to prove it. And then they go back over goals and they make recommendations for the next year, and you have this once a year, and then they kind of go on with their business. And they're talking about some of the improvements that she'd made, and then I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking this was all on Zoom because this was during communism when everything was shut down here in California. And so when when we're sitting back over here, and I just start thinking, I'm like, well, that's the left lobe, and that's the right brain over there. And then she got this because she really. It was funny when they shut everything down. She was playing Roblox, which is a video game, and we're not big on that, but there really wasn't much else to do, so we gave her a little grace on that. And because she wanted to play with other kids, but she couldn't spell or read really well, there was a voice command, so she would press a button, say what she wanted to say, and it would print up. And it was only like 3 days later, we're driving in the car, and then she said, "Hey, that sign says, you know, stop here for more info," or whatever it said. And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what." And I stopped and I looked, and I'm like, "What did you say?" And she repeated it, and then she read something else, and from that point on, her just reading and comprehension just took off. Well, she had problems with math, and and I'm sitting there and they're going back over there. She's below average in math, having struggle with that, and I'm like, well, that's left brain, and that's how how that's working. I'm like, huh. And they were talking about her penmanship, and she's not a doctor yet, so she's not allowed to have bad penmanship. But they were talking about, she needs to write slower and be more precise, and I think it was the psychologist said, well, we can make the accommodation where she can use a keyboard. That way it's more legible for her. And I'm just thinking, they keep lowering the bar and lowering the bar and trying to, and I see that they want her to succeed. But it just dawned on me that they really didn't know what they were talking, because I'm just thinking root cause. So what's causing that? And it just kind of dawned on me after like all this years of going on. This is what's the root cause of behavior? And that's how the brain processes things, and how you intake the world. And I'm having this whole conversation in my mind, and I break it up at the point, and they ask if there's any questions, and I'm going, yeah. I said, as I'm sitting here, and I kind of repeat their findings, and I'm going, and I'm just thinking out, and I was just thinking out loud, and I'm saying, you're talking about this and that, and that's how the hemispheres are working. In the right hemisphere over there, and I'm talking about the different lobes about what's happening, and that she's overwhelmed. And I said, and then the other side, and I said, I'm not sure if you guys know what you're talking about. And I didn't realize it at the time, because again, I was in my own little world, and this was on Zoom, and my wife, my ex-wife, that she was at home, and her boyfriend came in, and she said, "Come on over here. I've heard Bill's voice like this. This is going to get good." And I didn't mean to go off on them, but I was just thinking in my own way. I said, "You guys are not realizing the problem." And I said, "I hope you guys are really, proud of yourself that you get to check these boxes and think you're doing something. But the job here is not to check boxes and make sure that these things fit really neatly and that you're doing something that hopefully it'll happen." I said, "You guys are working on the software, which is the stuff around there." I said, "It sounds like there's a hardware problem." And I said, "Let's check out her brain, and we need to do this." And I go, "You keep," and I don't expect you guys to know this neuro stuff, except for the psychologist. I wanted her to, she should have had some reckling of some basic neurology. Is that when you write, that's a portion of the brain that has to do with the cerebellum, that coordinates everything. It's fine muscle movement, and it kind of energizes and organizes how the brain works. And I said, "You should know that. And if you degrade her stimulus to pressing the button, the brain doesn't know whether you're pressing an A, an E, an exclamation point, a shift key, or anything. But when you cursive write, it creates a pattern in the brain that makes you recognize things." If you guys have ever done journals or written anything or taking notes, the brain responds to cursive writing the best. But if you're just printing and stuff like that, because there's a lot more stimulus in moving that around. And again, I'm just thinking out loud, and I said, "You guys, we need to do an EEG or QEEG, which is measuring the brain and looking at the functional and the foundation of what's going on." And and they just kind of looked at me. Don't they go, "Well, we don't, the the district," and the district is like a big, it there's not a district. It's like their protocol. "Well, the district doesn't allow this. We don't do it." It's like talking about the insurance company or the financial system or something. "We don't do that." And and it kind of dawned on me at that point was, of course they don't do that, because they're kind of long. And this is where the tinfoil hat gets set on my head pretty firmly. They're a system. They're a big system to process things, and they're more interested in not the individual people. The people, I think everybody involved really cares, but the system. You do this, you get this diagnosis, whether it's medical, whether it's educational, whether whatever, and you just do it this way because that's the gold standard, because we just said it that way, and this is the way it is. And I stopped, and I'm like, "No, we can't do this." And that's when I went back over and I just studied and kind of took off what I already know. Now, right now, I just pulled up a. This is how you learn. This is called the pyramid of learning, and it's a broken down. And for the people that are just listening to this, it's a triangle with different. Like, think about what it looks like the food pyramid. At the bottom, the base of this is the central nervous system, and this is the first thing that's developed in infants. So when kids are born, and they're born with a dysregulation, we don't we don't really know that, but it has to do with the smell, the visual system, the auditory system, the tasting, proprioception, or how the joints and muscles move, and vestibular is that's the balance thing. If you think of like inner ear and tactile touch, and then when the NATO was going there, she was very tactile because that's the only way that she could see. She didn't have a good visual field. She has some auditory stuff that she's still getting. It wasn't really bad, but it was different. And the first thing that has to happen is a sensory integration. So when these kids come out to learn anything, whether it's how to fix a car, how to do math, how to quilt, or how to take a rocket to the moon, in order to learn something, this is how it happens. These basic things are our perception, our senses of what's going on here. And then once you kind of get those down, you say, oh, okay, I can smell, taste, see, move around a little bit. The next thing is a sensory motor. Motor means movement. And the way that the brain develops and everything that goes around is as soon as you're born, because you're in amniotic fluid and you're just sitting there, and then all of a sudden you're born and you're struck into the real world, and now you have gravity on you. You were protected really, really well in the womb, and now you out, and as soon as gravity has, that's a stimulus. And that stimulus starts to get these nerves in this brain to start going, hey, what's that? I have to roll over and look up and move my eyes to the left and right. And now there's light coming in and there's all these things. And that's how the brain starts to develop. So once it gets through all these, vision, auditory, and taste and smell and everything, you go to the next level. And the next level of development, can't talk, development is the sensory motors portion. And this is when you start to see where your body is. There's reflexes that will cover a little bit long or in just a minute that are, where are we at? There we go. That we get reflexes, and those are called primitive reflexes. These are the first things that just happen unconsciously to help you survive. But you start to learn, this is my hand, and this is where my nose lives. And, the games we play with baby, where's your nose? Where's your ear? This is all helping these things out. And it's the next part of development. Well, once you kind of get some basics of that down, you start to develop a little further, and it's more perceptual motor movement. It's like this is where you start to learn language and figure out, this is far and this is near. We start paying a little attention. We start looking at our, ever watch a baby, they just kind of will stare at their hands and like, oh, I can't believe this is moving. And they figure out this hand-eye coordination. When I reach my hand out and I touch something, then I get a feedback, and they learn how to move this stuff. And then way at the very top, after we go through all these different things, we get into cognition and intellect, how we actually learn. And it starts out with behavior. The same thing that we're trying to get by in our kids with all these services to change a behavior. And if anybody that hasn't gone through this, when you get into something like ABA or occupational therapist and a lot of this stuff, it's like, all right, get your toothbrush, put it, and stick it in there and put it in and brush your teeth. Very good. Let's make a checklist. And the checklist says, this is how we brush our teeth. And they go, get your toothbrush, get the toothpaste, put the toothpaste on the toothbrush, get some water, put it in your mouth, scrub your pie hole, get everything going, rinse, like that. So that's an activity of daily living. It's a behavior. Other behaviors, this is how we sit at a table. This is how we use a fork. This is how we raise our hand before we don't interrupt. And there. Then we start to get into academic stuff. Here's your ABCs. Here's 1, 2, 3. Here's 1 + 1. Here's how you, interact with kids. This is how you dribble a basketball. This is stuff like that. So when I ran across this, I'm like, yeah, we always start at when we're doing the therapy with the kids, we're starting at the learning and the academics and the daily living and the behavior, and we're doing this. And the way that I talk about this, it's like if you came across somebody that doesn't speak English and you say, hey, where's the best restaurant in town? And they look at you and whatever language they're speaking, they're going like, I don't understand. And they say something back in their language. But you're so inept, and you say, so you decide to speak slower and louder, thinking that they'll understand you if you just say it slower and louder. And again, they repeat back, and then then you start grunting and pointing, and then they kind of get it, and they look around, and they still don't know what you're saying. That's exactly what's happening in the current, from my experience. All the stuff I'm talking about is my experience, and this is how I pieced through this and how we got. Because again, I don't want to disparage the stuff that they're doing. I just know there's a missing piece because they're starting at the top of the pyramid and they're forgetting about the basics all the way up. And this is exactly what I said when I said that we're working on the software and we're not working on the hardware. So when I, where am I not moving? Hold on, I'm running through more technical difficulties. So we got here, and so this is how the story began. I decided we'll take it upon herself. I started out and I took her to, got her a QEEG, which is measuring the brain waves. What's going on with the brain? Also, if you're seeing this on video, if you look at the picture, this is the NATO, and she's running through everything that she's running through. She has a long, narrow face, and this is what they call a mouth breather face. When we don't suckle properly and we don't chew, even though she ate a lot, but she's not chewing. But the I think some stuff that had to do with the jaw surgery early on, as she started to grow, her face got longer, which means that her palate and her ultimately her airway got smaller, and so she wasn't getting it. She would snore and almost like if her adenoids were always swollen, which they weren't. And despite all the stuff that she's going through, she didn't. She never gets sick. Probably a lot of the, of course, it's the chiropractic care, I'm sure, and the diet. But she's always up and about. But we went over and I had her airway checked out, and she has a very narrow airway that's going out, which causes her to have to breathe through her mouth because it wasn't going through the sinuses like they should. Well, what's this have to do with ADHD and autism and stuff? Well, one of the things that happens if you're not getting enough oxygen, not enough that you're gagging and you're gasping for air and everything, but when you're not getting enough, people think that when we hold our breath that we gasp for air because we want more air. And that's not the case at all. The reason that we gasp, it's a reflex because there's a buildup of CO2. And you have these internal CO2, which is carbon dioxide, that builds up and it's very agitating. So it builds up in the body, including the brain. So when you're trying, I want you to imagine that if I was holding your head underwater and you're fighting to get up, you're craving everything that you're doing right now is just, I have to gasp. I can't. If anybody's held their breath and you get to that point, well, that's what's happening to them physically when they're sitting there and they can't sit still. And you're saying, well, you just shut up. I mean, just sit still. Because we're running to the top of the pyramid and their bottom of their pyramid is not being taken care of and it's never addressed. And all they do is get yelled at for that. I told you and you were bad. What's that do to their self-confidence? What's that do? But because as parents and caregivers and everything else, we don't realize that. We don't realize that that's what's going on inside their body. We're trying to make them little mini me's like we should because we're the parents, we're the caregivers. But we think that they're just like us, and they're not. And that's where we get tough. Now, I talked earlier, the next thing that we talked about was the primitive reflexes. Primitive reflexes, again, are these things that we're born with that help us survive. And these primitive reflexes, when we're baby, it's like the rooting reflex. If you strike or you stroke the side of a baby's mouth, they'll suckle towards that side and open their mouth because that's how they suckle off the breast. There's also startle reflex that if they feel like they're falling back, they'll immediately put their hands up for protection because we don't want that to happen. There's other reflexes that'll have to be when their head turns because when they come out of the womb and down the birth canal, it's almost like they're swimming. One arm will go out as their head turns the opposite way, and then they'll do the opposite to try to get out. And there's a bunch of these reflexes that we have that when the baby comes out of the womb, usually within the first 18 months, as it starts to learn these motor patterns and the sensory motor patterns that we just talked about in the triangle, it becomes part of their conscious routine, and it becomes it's like the baseline about how all their movement patterns and stuff begin. And the reason why that's important is because that's the scaffolding on how coordinated they are, how they can reach things. So like if you're listening to this and you have a kid or you know a kid, you'll see that they tend to be a little bit clumsy. They might walk a little bouncy on their toes or moving around. It's because they never really get these they never integrate this stuff, so they never get those motor patterns. It's almost like they skip through. And we'll see this in a lot of times. People will come up and they'll say, well, my baby never crawled. She just was born laying there and she popped up and walked, and they think she's so advanced. That's not advanced because she's missing a vital important of the development. So these and primitive reflexes are a whole rabbit hole, but this is kind of an overview of what's going on. Is that a lot of those times when I've been working with children like this sense, and I'll show the parents, I say, "We'll do this, do like that," and a lot of times the parents will have these primitive reflexes that haven't been integrated, and they go, "Well, she's just like me." So this is something that's overlooked. In fact, been to a couple pediatricians with the NATO. We didn't do medical stuff with my oldest daughter, but they never go through primitive reflex. They never check those. And then the next thing is the MTHFR gene. And they call that the motherfucker gene. Because I know if you're reading that or if you've heard of it, you're going, oh, that's exactly what I'm thinking. But that's what they call it. So no letters or anything like that, because that's just normal lexicon. But this has something to do with methylation, and that methylation of your genes and the like is some. It's like how they become unwound and how the genes. If you've heard of genes being expressed, it's almost like, think of it like a flower that's blooming. It's kind of opening up. Well, when you have one of these are called SNPs, and they're small portions of your DNA, and you want just one bloom to come out. But if you don't have, if you have a miscoding in this gene, which is much higher in this population of kids, that they can't do the things. Their genetic predisposition doesn't allow them to do this. There's ways around that, and there's ways that you can get it to do. But if you're without checking for this gene and trying to do all the things right, you'll still come up a little short with that. And this is a genetic testing, and then there's some supplements. It's not a drug thing. It's just a way that your body will react, and there's some special B vitamins that you can get that will help open this up. And I had one patient that, well, actually, I had a couple patients that went and got this checked, and it was $32 worth of supplements, and within 6 weeks and one within 2 weeks was talking, and they had never talked previously. And it's could be a coincidence, could not, but a lot of things change when they're allowed to express them to their full genetic, potential. And then there's some basic stuff that we were doing with nutrition, and it's just what's going in the body. We want to make sure that there's lots of good things going in, and by good things I mean like really good things. It's real food. It rots really quick if you leave it alone. The NATO, when she was going, of course she just eats a lot, but as we start running through this stuff, we dialed in her nutrition just a little bit more. We're not. She eats very well, so like when there's a treat here or there, we kind of give her a little grace on the treat to let her be. But She'll eat just about anything that we put in front of her, and she'll eat some stuff that we don't put in front of her. But she's very open to doing that. The next thing that we had to look at was the detoxing. This population of kids with ADHD spectrum disorders that is going on, they tend to have higher levels of heavy metals. And heavy metals will come from they're naturally in the environment from volcanic, you know, explosions and stuff. They throw those into the airs, but we're picking these up in jabs. We're picking these up in some water. We're picking up these things with the runoff from different things, what's sprayed onto our food, the chemtrails that are moving around, all this other stuff that's there's just so much toxic load, and heavy metals are not good for the body. Like I said, they're in our environment, but under normal circumstances, when typical people are just running around, they're able to detox these things pretty well. These kids are not, because they're holding these things in, and it stops that a lot of energy. Heavy metals will stop mitochondria, which are the power cells of the body, from representing themselves. So I want you to take all this stuff of what's going on, and go, what's this doing to their confidence? Now, if you think about somebody, if you're confident in something and you're out there, you'll ask questions. You'll what's this and how's that, and you can make it upstairs, and you can climb this, and you can do somersaults, and these kids don't even recognize where their bodies are, so their confidence is crap. What does a body look? Think about right where you're at. What does a body look? Somebody that looks unconfident, a little hesitant, not sure of themselves. How do they hold their body? Are they more outgoing and full of friends? Or do they stand to themselves because they don't want to get, because they don't understand the world that we're living in. They don't understand what they did and why you can't reach up and touch somebody else's toy without asking it just because you want to, because there's impulsive stuff. They don't do that. So rather than getting negative feedback, they just kind of stick to themselves. And they tend to want to be around things. And this is where we kind of come into the right brain, left brain thing. I'm missing. All right, I'm all over this. Let me go back in here. Let me back up over here. Uh, Before the right brains. So I reached out to my functional neurology people, and this is the Carrick Institute, which is the main place, gold standard for functional neurology. Functional neurology is not only diagnosing the stuff, what's going on with the brain stuff, but giving non-pharmaceutical applications and things that you can do to actually overcome those things. The body's very resilient. It's just nobody will take the time, or very few people will take the time to work on the brain to bring all these things back. And it's not a theory. It's not like my blue crystal is going to cure this. And so this is just hard, basic science about how the brain works. So Dr. Michael Pierce, a really good friend of mine that we have in the practice, that I'll fly in periodically to do QEEGs on my concussion patients, my epileptic patients, any neuro stuff, to break these things down to get that. So I called on him, and we did the QEEG, and he introduced me to Dr. Robert Malello, who came up with this. He's the leading dude in brain balance and functional neurology for these. And this is a disconnected dis- disconnected kids, and it's really important for us to get this taken care of. And he was the first one to really bring this out into the public outside of academia and just a few practitioners. And it has to do with how the hemispheres are developed. And in our case, actually, after going through and doing an examination and some questionnaires and looking at the things that the NATO was doing, and I've done this on bunch of kids since, and you can kind of figure out which side, which hemisphere was dominant. When you have a brain development disorder, they're both going to be affected, but they'll tend to have a dominance. The right side is the first portion hemisphere that is developed, and that's usually from ages of 0 to 2. And this has to do with the primitive reflexes. Like I said, those are the things that are making you survive. This is where they start to figure out who they are, that this is my hand and this is my nose and this is where I sit in the world. And it's big picture thinking. And it's the first thing that they start to do. They're just trying to figure out themselves. It's the big picture. This is the world. This is my family. This is how things work. And this is my hand. From about 2 to 4, the left hemisphere starts to develop more rapidly than the right. And this has to do with development of language. This is when we start to talk more. We recognize people's faces. We recognize that eyes wide open and eyebrows out with a big smile means happiness or surprise, and that's what that means. And when we have a frowny face, it means that you're probably sad. This is when you start to be able to interact and socialize with the community. Remember, humans are we're we're tribes, we're tribal people, we're social animals. And so we need to have this interaction going on. And also remember that language and development of all this stuff is fairly recent as far as the brain development. Yeah, so it was really important to subconsciously be able to read faces and postures. And this is why most of communication is not verbal. It has to do with the body, the interaction, because we pick those things up. But it's all about creating that community. How do I get by in this world? The right side is this is me, and then the next thing is this is us. And if the right brain never develops in somebody at home in preschool, and the first thing that you do, you put them in a social environment, and without the right brain having some kind of basis, the left hemisphere just does not move around very well. So the next thing that we had to go back over is we had to fight through and get into the diet. And I kind of talked about that before. The brain's favorite thing is keto diet. The brain is mostly fat. It's about 25% cholesterol, and that's the growth factor. Fats, especially omega 3s, are to the brain what protein is to the muscle. So we want to make sure that this is good. Up and coming research, more anecdotal at this time, but we're seeing a lot of changes in carnivore diets, which is a meat-based diet. It's animal-based diet, and doing really good that way. Kind of more of the middle of the road, but is the paleo diet. Keeping in mind that there's no perfect diet for everybody, but these are all whole food, real food diets that we want to have things that are taken care of. What doesn't work is the food pyramid. It was a lie that they've kept in, and it was a big marketing crunch from our government that stayed around 50 or 60 years and is criminal in what they were telling us to do. And they were teaching us in school about what to eat, where the basis of that was grains. Grains are they're anti-nutrients. They actually bind to a lot of nutrients. It's not that they don't have some value in some cases in little pieces, but when you base your diet on grains, you're bound to have a lot of problems. There's a lot of those with too many vegetables like that. There can be lectins and oxalate and phytates in this population that that are chronically causing inflammation, and that's not good. And there's something about the government stuff or the protocols that they use is at the top of the pyramid that they say have very little, which are the main things. So here they say have very little fat, saturated fat, salt, and sugar. Aside from the sugar, they're wrong about everything. So if you're following that diet, stop it. The other things that we had, and probably even more important, is again the toxins that we have. There's things in these processed foods that they have dyes and seed oils and glyphosate. I always pronounce that wrong. I get my chops busted for it. But the artificial sugars, the little pink packets of poison, aspartame, all these things, they're not good. And you say, well, there are no calories. Nobody gives a shit about calories. It's about what these things are doing when they're broken down. And great, you're going to be the thinnest person in the coffin. None of these things work. And when you start to get the kids, and you have to watch out for foods that taste really good. There are chemically treated foods that are called hyperpalatable foods that create, they're called neurotoxin. They're excitotoxin. They get in the brain and they light the brain up. This causes an addiction. It's the same thing when you're sitting at your slot machine and you get ding, 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 and you win something. You want to do it again, and you want to do it again. Do you ever wonder why the fries never make it home from the fast food place, or why you Pringles you can't eat just one? The first hyperpalatable food was Doritos, and it started out as just corn chips, and then pretty soon um, those came out, and they decided, well, let's make some super different things going on here, and it didn't work out too well. And MSG, which is another chemical that's going on, but you got to watch the neurotoxins in kids. You've got to make sure that they're moving around. They're doing the basics things that create life that all of us should do. They've got to sleep well. They've got to get out in the sunshine. We've got to breathe. We've got to make sure that they're properly hydrated. We've got to make sure that they're poo-pooing, peeing, sweating, everything else that they need to get out. They've got to move. Play is awesome. I want them to climb. I want them doing somersaults. We want them doing everything else. And we covered the healthy eating. The system has let us down. Whether it's their fault or it's not their fault, it was just they just went down the wrong rabbit hole. I don't know. But we have to get to the root cause. We need to update our approach rather than just staying with the status quo that does not work. There's every one of these things that I talked about is a rabbit hole within itself. But the main thing I want you to take away from it is there's a different way. There's a basic science way. I hate when people say, well, let's listen to science, because that's just weird. Science nowadays has been bought and sold like anything, but let's look at the basic science, the things that we know what blood is, we know what nerves do, we know how the brain, we know all this stuff. I made none of this stuff up. The guys that I learned this stuff didn't make it up. This was done through just biological research. And we're skipping that. We're going into like, let's do our ABCs. Let's do things better. And it's just silly. In this date of time when we have Google and chat and we have everything at our fingertips but we're not using our resources properly. And it's hard to find those people that get into this. So, but the future is bright. There's things around the corner that are going to change everything. But you have to have a basic health to take advantage of those. There's peptides, there's stem cells, there's the new quantum biology that's coming out is going to be amazing. But you have to have that baseline in there to be able to take advantage of it. There's no shortcuts. Just like the brain development that we talked about, these things have to be done in order, and you have to have some sort of baseline. And it's very simple, and most of it's free, if not very, very cheap. And this is where I kind of stopped with this. The deepest, darkest corner of hell is saved for those that knew but did not tell. I wasn't going to be the one that knew but didn't tell. And I've told people like this, and this is really the first time that I've talked about it publicly about what we've done, but I consider what we have as a success story. So that's where I ended my very first presentation on that. there was such feedback about we want to do this, and there's so many people in the class. Well, let's do this. I know nutrition, and it was almost like an old kids show. Let's put on a show. I have mom's curtains, and we can use my garage, and let's do this. There's people out there that want to help, that are dying to help, that are passionate about helping these kids because they see the bad side of it. So this is the format that I put together, and this is not real, but this is what I've said. Week one is we're going to evaluate the brain testing, the sensory system, the motor system. We have a pretty thick examination form the parents can do at home to figure this out. The next week is going over primitive reflexes, how to find out what they are, how to perform them, how to integrate them, and this is a workshop for parents to show you how to do this stuff at home. Week three is going to be brain nutrition, detoxification, the special testing, how we get all this stuff, the environmental impacts, just not over outside, but in your home. And then week four is we talk about exercise, but it's more neurological play, body awareness, changing the brain chemistry. Movement changes the brain chemistry in a positive way by stimulating what's called BDNF, and that's like miracle grow for the brain. And how to use play, neurological interaction, and everything for social integration to develop the left brain and bring up everything back from the right brain. And week five, this is something that as I pulled out as I talk to more and more parents, is parent training. Not only what body language you're doing, but how your mirror neurons work. Mirror neurons are the things that you use so that they can copy them. It's mindset training, not woo-woo stuff, but remember, the kids they're not experiencing the world like you, and you have to step into their shoes, and you have to join their world first and invite them into this new one. And there's an energy. I know that you're overwhelmed. I was there. You're going like, what the hell? Like that. And there's energy that you need to carry into the room because remember, verbal stuff is fairly new. We can look at how the mind and the body and how everything else works and how you show up, what energy you show up. All these things put together in an immersive training over a 5-week period. And then, like any learning, it has to be a total immersion with spaced repetition. So we've created, I thought about creating a community. Like I said, we have lots of people that want to be involved in doing that stuff to celebrate, and just somebody that sits around and gets it. So that's what I did, and that's how I ended this up in. I'm gonna bring back over here in what I did. This is what I did. I did this personally, and it turned out great. So share this with somebody that if they get that, ask more questions, get involved with this because I think we can make a big, big difference. This is Dr. Bill Janeshak, Conquering Stress Podcast, ADD or ADHD and Autism. All right. Share this with your homies. All right. Bye.